Today we're going to learn the key teaching tactics of #1 instructor Mark Blackburn. He's taking us behind the scenes, showing us exactly what he does with the best players in the world.
All right, Mark, so let's talk about early extension and the teaching tactics to tackle that, because I've got a bit of it in my swing. What are the different ways that you can approach that?
Early extension is not necessarily a fault, it's more of a characteristic of what people do. Extension in itself is powerful. That's their mechanism to generate speed, so if you get rid of it, you can kill their speed and that can be problematic. Now, I would say the reason there is a bit of a stigma associated with it is it can lead to inconsistency because you lose space. Now you have to manipulate. Generally, it's a precursor to some back problems because as you thrust into the ball, you invariably have lateral flexion or a lot of side bend. That tends to put stress on your lower back, which golf's not great for as a whole. So it's more from the consistency and injury sort of predisposition. However, there are players, Jack Nicklaus was arguably the greatest player of all time. He early extended. So I always like to tell people, it's one of those things, you can do it and it can be very effective, but it's also to the degree to which you do it. I'm all about longevity, consistency of shots, and obviously injury prevention. We love golf, it's a great game, we want to play it for as long as possible. Based on what you described, there's a couple of things that I would be really interested to see. Okay. First one, I want to see how your hips move. Simply, you're going to put your right leg down, left leg is going to be sort of here in this position. Is turn as far as you can to the right and as far as you can to the left, and then we're going to switch legs. So we're looking for how much range do you have. A little limited there, turning into your trail side. Now let's go to the lead side. Just feel like you're turning as far as you can. Okay, straight away that's like, oh, a little limited. Now let me just show you for an example. Flare your left foot 45 degrees. Now do the same test.
Hold on, let me not fall over.
So, but you've got more range, right? You're able to clear and turn through it. So every degree you externally rotate, big word for flare your foot out, you get a one-to-one with your hip mobility. Now let's kind of take a look at how you hip hinge, how you come down and touch your toes. So not too bad, pretty good there. So hip hinge is pretty good. That's core control, we want that, that's important. Now let's have a look at your disassociation. I want to see if you can keep your upper body still and rotate your lower body towards the target. Now, I'm going to hold your shoulders. You tell me if it's any easier.
Yeah,
quite a bit easier, right?
Yeah.
So I added some stability and that made that easier. If you can't separate the upper body from your lower body and it all goes together, a lot of times that might lead you to come more outside in, and then you might use extension as a mechanism to kind of shallow it and put the club on the balls. Let's just kind of see how the glute strength is. So on your back in a bridge position, I want you to keep your extend your left leg. And you tell me where you kind of feel that.
My right, like quad in there.
Right.
And then the low
back.
Yep.
Okay. So ideally we would be feeling that in the left glute and the hamstring would be off and you wouldn't feel it in your lower back. Okay, so down and we're going to do the other side. So bridge up and then do the opposite. How about that?
That's better.
Okay, that's
not in
good.
the low back, yeah. Just
okay.
in the left.
Okay, so there's a little bit of shaking. And it definitely slightly dropping, right? So the goal is, could you hold that for about 15 seconds and not move at all, be rock solid like a bridge? That's difficult, so that means there might be a little bit of inhibition, like hard time firing the glutes, which potentially could cause you some problems. So you've got a couple of things there that might predispose you to early extension. Okay.
All right, so teaching tactic 2, forces. We are going to measure that here on these force plates. I'm gonna hit a shot, then we'll look at some graphs and see what happens. Bit of a push flare out to the right.
Okay, which would be in line with somebody that is an early extender. Your body extends, you get some of this lateral flexion, right bend. Now the face is going to open up and you get a push to the right. So that's why you see a lot of people that have early extension, because they develop a toss type release to square the club face up. When we see not enough force on the lead side, A lot of times we tend to see people, they drag back with the right foot, you see right foot slip, but that drives the right hip forwards. But if there's nothing to push on the left to get it to continue to go, we see that hip launching towards the ball. And that kind of predisposes people to that early extension. In here, when I initially look at this, yours looks pretty good. We want to see that your right foot isn't pulling back more than your left foot is pushing. Your combined force will start to get pulled when the trail foot's pulling more than the lead foot in front of your mass, and that then leads to your spine actually extending upwards. A positive sagittal plane torque flexes you forwards, keeps you in your posture, and negative sagittal plane torque, basically when your right foot is pushing more than your left, is going to pull that force in front of your mass and make you stand up. That's kind of what we're starting to see here. Now, hopefully, you're going to take over and start pushing more with the left than the right, which you kind of are at this point. So now you start to pull the mass behind your mass and you're beautifully bending forwards. Now, folks that early extend, who don't push enough with their lead leg, their trail leg drags back, their lead leg's not pushing enough, and now all of a sudden what ends up happening is now they bend and they're bending their spine upwards, so they're extending. So one of the things we look for, and that's why the force plates are so useful in diagnosing somebody who's an early extender, is to try and see if they have sagittal plane torque in play. That's implied by lead foot push. So I'm on a stool here, but my lead foot frictionally pushing pulls the force behind my mass and bends me forwards. You're applying a pretty good force, but we do have a lead hip restriction, right? We already saw that. So now you get to a point where unless your foot's flared dramatically, now all of a sudden your hip runs out of range. That's where we see this sort of slide, sag in your lower body, and that's then gonna move your pelvis cross line, a little bit of extension. But yours isn't necessarily happening here because of the force. You've got beautiful forces, much better than some tour players we see, but you do have a physical limitation. So potentially we could open your stance line up, we could flare your lead foot to allow you to compensate for that. So what a good thing would be to recapture, let's change the stance line, let's give you a chance to get a little more left, utilizing the forces you've got, but accommodate your physical limitation.
Double plane ready.
Oh, that felt good.
What's interesting here is I think you reduced the force because you flared the foot,
Yeah.
but you were able to clear and get out the way, and the start line was probably more left, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So there's your hip turning back. And now on the way down, you can see how much more your hip is clearing and moving left. Now, this right leg has still got some issues in terms of your knees working towards the ball, your trail foot's not really banking or everting, but you're definitely not extending into it. So now you're staying on that line, which is what a lot of golfers would do well to do, understanding that you can go buy a driver, it's great, but if you don't understand what your body can do physically, doesn't matter how good the driver is. Sort of self-guidance with some biofeedback via video, live video, draw some lines, that would be the next sort of strategy, because from a force perspective, you're doing good stuff.
Okay. This video is sponsored by the good folks at Rapsodo.
Rapsodo is a fantastic launch monitor if you're looking to improve your game. Has simulation indoors, outdoors. You're able to measure your distances. You can now measure spin. It's a fantastic tool, great price point, operates on your iPad, super easy to use. If you want to get better, you need to get the MLM2 Pro from Rapsodo. It's definitely going to help your golf game.
Not a microphone though.
So anytime that we're giving you feedback, we would, through some type of technology, it'd be biofeedback, whether it be video here, whether it be 3D, whatever it may be, like it's just giving you some type of input as to what you're doing right or wrong. Now, everyone asks kind of why is this important? Well, look, this is a made up pelvis. Your pelvis is relatively elliptical shaped, tilted forwards, right? Yep. As we turn back, in a normal progression, we're going to tilt and the trail side of the pelvis is going to go up. So you actually talked about that in, that some of the stuff you've done with speed is to try and get that pelvis to go up. That's normal pelvic motion. So it turns up and back. So if I put this on the line here, that line, it goes up and back. Do you see how just by turning, I just turned, you see how it moved back behind the line. So now, in the downswing, it should orientate back to relatively level. and then it should work back up and around this way. So think of your pelvis as the transmission. This is the wheels, your lower body, and then the engines, your upper body. You're trying to, the pelvis area is the transmission that sort of puts that into the swing. So it's really important, like understanding the displacement, where it moves, and the motion of what it's doing as it's moving is really vital. Now we could potentially use 3D, use an audio tone, but if your goal is to see that, feel it, you watch the screen, you're trying to load back behind that line, so sitting into that pelvis. Now you're trying to come down. As you come down, stay back down behind that line. Now remember, we made the adjustments. You've gone back to your normal setup. Open up more, get a little more flared. That should allow you to clear into that lead side a lot more effectively. And that should make getting to that through the ball a lot easier. So go slowly to the top, and now feel like when you turn, now that's allowing, yeah, look at that, it's way better. You're able to clear through the shot. We looked at your force, you push, but they're pushing so hard that that's making them then, that reaction force is making them spin around, which is counterintuitive. So I'm applying an action force, and the reaction force is then pushing back and making me turn around. And that's the opposite. Someone who doesn't apply that force just slides, they're just going cross line straight into the ball. Now they better have good hands, otherwise. And they're also not really going to decelerate as much as the person who's posting and getting around. And obviously deceleration is speed when we get to the longer clubs. So that's how we would use the video for biofeedback, just to let you feel what it's like to do it correctly. And then the next progression could be some neurofeedback of me feeding your fault. I'm going to push you into extension from behind, or I'm going to pull you, and then you have to now apply some force, create some dynamic stability to not do it. That's going to give you awareness of, oh wow, that's what I need to do to not go this way. When it comes to feeding the fault, there's two ways to do it. So I'm going to push you from behind, try and stop you moving into the ball. You're going to have to resist, and then the other one is I'm going to pull you in. We're going to see which one you respond better to. So again, the artistic part of coaching and teaching is to find the strategies that work best. So you're a little more open, you're going to get to the top. Now I'm going to push you, don't let me win. Okay, so I'm going to push way harder, don't let me win. Yeah, there you go. So don't let me win, push me away. You're trying to imagine you're pushing me diagonally over this way. Yes, there you go. Yep. Good, one more. Okay, so definitely.
That's really good.
Okay, so now let's see how you do with this. Okay. So this is a little harder with the club, but you can put your arms across your chest. Okay. So we're going to put this around your waist, and then I'm going to pull you into the fault. So obviously I can probably pull more than I can push, but your job is to obviously push from the ball of your feet to send yourself again diagonally backwards. So let's see that. Please hold that up. You tell me which one's easier. Yes, you go. So I'm pulling on you. I'm trying to feed the fault. You're going to have to use a force and the right movement to make it happen. There we go. Okay, so which one do you feel like is harder for you, or kind of gives you a better feel for not moving in?
I like the feel of the push. I could tell the difference, like I had to push a certain direction.
Okay,
that way.
So now what we might do to help that is we might also add another visual cue as you're doing it to make you aware of where do we want that to translate or move. So go ahead, set up again, and we can put a club at about a 45 through your feet. And now when I push you, you're trying to push me on that 45. Okay, good. So don't let me win. Keep applying the force. Very good. And one more time. So when we see that, when you come down the line, we're going to video one of those just so that you can see kind of the difference on where you're translating that pelvis, where it's moving. Big word for moving, okay? So to the top, don't let me win, push me. And again, one more time, try and knock me over. Okay, so we are also now living in extremes. So the next strategy we're going to use is variability, to intentionally use a fault, an overdone and underdone Goldilocks drill, we call it. So too big, too small, just right.
Yep.
Okay, the brain just does well in coding that way. But let's show you what happened here on this line with me feeding the fault. So there we are. You loaded back, and now you've loaded through. And the other thing that's happening is when you added in the 45 and the orientation, you see that your pelvis has got that lateral flexion or tilt to it, which is what we see in the best players. When you look down the line in the finish of the best players in the world, you see their trail hip is a little bit lower than their lead hip, and they're in that finished position. That's happening through healthy, accurate pelvic movement. That's what we want. And so you can see how much you're in your posture. We never even mentioned any of that. It's just that's what happens. That's a very different orientation. Look how also organically your trail arm and the club are lined up, that sort of classic right forearm shaft position. We didn't mention that, but that's happening as a byproduct of you getting more left, opening up. Now you're in these beautiful inclination coming into the hit. Much easier, you've got space to hit it, can do whatever you want. You can kind of see how your right knee is clearing, your right leg's banking more, and we haven't even talked about any of that.
Yep. It's an amazing tactic. It's such a good feel.
Absolutely. So now let's have a look at using some fault and variability. How much of that do we need to do to be able to make it stick? And on the golf course, let's say we use a percentage. My buddy Will Wu, motor learning expert, he talks about like overdone, underdone, but then a percentage. So it's 50% overdone. Like putting a value to that, so that under competition and under stress, you're going to have to amplify the exaggerations to make them work, but you've got to train that as well. And I think that's where variability is a really important skill, and it's a vital part of motor learning in the lab. All the research just shows the empirical data of it. It's just fantastic. So we're going to apply that next. We're going to use some variability. I want you to do what you feel is the now, good setup, foot flared, slightly open, ideal pelvic movement. What you just felt in the feeling the fault, just like show me one. Don't hit the ball, but just show me the movement.
Okay, so it'd be.
Okay, now show me under ideal. What's a bad one? Okay, and now show me over ideal, like exaggerated off the charts. Really way too much. Okay, perfect. And guess what? What's really cool there is you fell left and forwards. Now, if you watch old timers, this is really interesting. Have you had the club? You see a lot of this. The caddy, the player is hit, they're walking diagonally that way, and then they hand the club to the caddy, excuse me. So they're already moving that way. They're not moving into the ball. Nobody's moving in, losing space. They're creating space. And so we're going to we'll draw a line on your tailbone, just as those same sort of two lines as a reference point. So here's kind of ideal. Look where you are there in the finish. Kind of camera. Now let's go to the next one. So this is under ideal. The ability to associate good from bad is vital. The last one's going to be overdone too much. So you're ending up way more diagonally left and over in this position. That overdone is probably where you need to feel on the course, because you're going to have regression way more to the underdone. And then you may even need to be, okay, this is over ideal by 60%, not 50. So every day you could use video as a feedback tool to see where you're at. How much do I need to feel this to accomplish this today? Or how much am I doing it? Okay, wow, I feel like I'm doing it 50% more. That's just not enough, okay? So it starts to give you the ability to amplify feels, but also put a value on it so that you can reproduce it. The next thing would be, okay, what are some constraints we could use to help you do this properly? Like, there are some different strategies that we can use from a constraint perspective to create the movement. So that would be another strategy. Now you've got that whole gamut from physical to the force production. And then some of these are going to stick. Variability may be the right strategy for you. Every player is different, but my job is to give you as many different ways to feel, see, understand concept, be able to then go apply the information and get it done. And that's the process, regardless of skill level, that we go through to try and coach and teach players so that they can manage their tendencies and they can hit better golf shots.
Perfect. All right, next tactic, constraints. Let's do it.
So we're going to put a foam roller behind your left butt cheek. Okay, so you're set up at address, and your job is you want to try and knock that over coming through the ball.
Okay.
So as you come through, you're going to knock that over. So let's go to the top. We're not going to hit this, but let's try and make the movement. Back and then knock it over. Beautiful, really good. So that's giving you some type of feedback as to what you're trying to do. Now, we could also put something outside of the club to stop you moving out to the right, but I like to do things that are intentful. Instead of stopping you doing something, I'd rather you use a movement, do the right thing. So I'm encouraging you to move. If I say, I don't want you to do this, Gordy, that's not going to work. But if I say, okay, you're intent, that sort of diagonal 45 we had on the ground, the same thing is I'm trying to drive my left butt cheek this way. Now I'm driving my hip back and up. I'm moving, creating space. Now I'm able to get in a really good position, compress the ball, hit great golf shots. So your intent is to knock that over in the follow through. We don't want to cheat at doing it early, but we want to try and see you knock that over through the ball. Okay, good. You can see how much you're still on that line as you've come through. You've never moved into the ball, and then we've got a little bit of that trail side of the pelvis.
I bet what you like also is the lead foot.
Yeah, a little
what's
bit
the term you use for that?
Eversion, like
Eversion.
and a banking the
Banking.
foot. Yeah, that's
Okay.
what we want. Yeah. So we want that foot rolling. That creates a little bit more space. But again, if you're extending and moving into the ball, moving cross line, that's no good because you've lost all that space. The club comes up. You've got to manipulate. It leads to inconsistencies. So that's using a constraint, and you can put them anywhere in different positions. So some people might call that a drill, but I'm just using something to try and change the movement. Now from a drill perspective, I like to do things obviously we talked about before. Being in the gym is a big deal, but what are some movement patterns? So like if I'm trying to kind of create some drills for early extension, I've probably got a slew of them, but some of my favorites would be, again, getting the sensation. I might use a stool. Dr. Rose at TPI is big on this, kind of getting back in the backswing, lifting your trail foot up and getting used to pushing. So you're pushing yourself back frictionally. Then you can work up to pushing and twisting. That would be one. I'm a big fan of a skateboard. So I could use a skateboard to get that frictional push. So for pretty much all ground reaction forces, a skateboard's really helpful. But I get set up, I'm to the top, and I'm going to feel this push in early transition. Again, it's frictional, it's not down. Most people try this, they push down, but frictional. So these are drills. I might even use a slider that I could put in the gym. I give these to a lot of my players. So I'm going to put this down to the top. There's that frictional push. Sometimes I use a slide or a flip-flop and have them slide their foot into it, have it loose, and then slide their foot in. So those are all drills from that perspective. If I was going to go with some body drills, I might go with a couple of clubs. Favorite of mine is a couple of clubs under your chest, pointing at the ball. And folks that early extend tend to stand up and then this points cross line, as opposed to if I keep my tailbone back, this points at the ball, my chest is down and I'm actually moving a little more diagonally over to the left. I also have one called the floating ball drill, where I might imagine that I put a club across my pelvis, imagine a ball is floating, I'm going back, and then I'm trying to get that pelvis down towards the ground. That gets the foot banking, that gets that lateral flexion in the pelvis, the right bend, which now creates that space and lets me go through. One of the other ones I might do is actually hit some shots where I'm going to do a step around, where my foot flares slightly open to the top, I'm pushing and stepping around. So I'm actually going to start turning through. I've had Justin Rose playing practice rounds like that before to get that sensation of the push and the turn, so you're moving this way, you're not moving into the ball. But those are, say, 4 or 5 drills that are all going to help somebody who's got that early extension. So you've kind of got all of these different mechanisms all trying to accomplish the same goal, and it's just like trying to figure out which one sticks and which one works the best. But that's player dependent. How does somebody, what's their kinesthetic awareness? Intuitively, what do they do? But you've got to give them the concept first. Got to see if they can do it physically, see how they apply force, and then give them a roadmap of how to do it. And obviously the more you do it, the more reps. If you can tie this into gym work, it makes it really easy. And those are the kind of tactics that we use with players, regardless of the fault. It's the same process. We just happen to talk about early extension because it's so common. Again, it's not destructive for everybody, but for some people it is. Understanding it, what's proper pelvis movement, how can the pelvis help you in the golf swing. Understanding all of these things are important, and that's again player dependent, but that's the job of the teacher and the coach, is to diagnose that and then give a prescription that's going to help somebody play better. Obviously we want it to be as least technical as possible. You can see none of this was overly technical. It was very pragmatic, and that's the goal of coaching and teaching, to help people play better.
So I mean, these are the same tactics you use when we see you post a video of Justin Rose in here. Like, this is what you're doing to get swing changes to happen.
Yeah, and I think I didn't come up with this. This is just like the golf science community. It's like the world of neuroscience. It's all of motor learning, control. It's a lot of these different disciplines all coming together. And then as a coach, my job is to take things from different areas and try and apply it. But all we're doing is using information that's had success. Success leaves clues. Yeah. Like, okay, well, what do we do? How do we go about accomplishing that? And it's just an amalgamation of all those different things. But I think that's what coaching is. Coaching is like taking all these different pieces and then trying to figure out, it's like a puzzle that never ends, a player, because their swing's changing all the time. But how do you go in and make these adjustments? And as it's changing and evolving, my job's to stay a few steps ahead, but how do I nurture and send someone in a direction to try and stay in what you call their blueprint, to where they can play well for a period of time. And that's what does all of this align with the shot they want to hit? How does it work relative to their tendencies under pressure? Those things are important. That's why as a coach, I go to tournaments and I watch, because observation's huge as to what do they do. They're going to be highly subjective. I've got my eyes, I've got statistics, I've got all these things to kind of look at, okay, well, this is what happens. I've got a caddy who's probably objectively subjective, as I like to say, but all this goes into making coaching decisions, and then the better the data, the better the decisions. So to me, it's all of this goes into helping someone shoot lower scores, but that's not what everybody sees. People see someone standing behind someone on a range and think they're just giving them like tips. It's not really how it works.
Yep, that was awesome. Thank you, Mark, for letting us hang out. We got an inside look at these tactics that are being used at the highest level. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure to follow Mark on Instagram, kind of follow his journey so you can see the guys that come into the studio and kind of little insights into what they're working on. Really appreciate it. Make sure to subscribe. We have more with Mark coming soon.